Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Greetings to our honored guests, Dr. Yasuhiko Matsuda, World Bank Country Manager for Malaysia, Ms. Manon Bernier, Deputy Resident Representative, UNDP Malaysia, Singapore and Brunei Darussalam, Mr. Muhammad Abida, Head of the Islamic Development Bank's Centre of Excellence, Kuala Lumpur. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon to all the participants in the hall. My name is Shahira Muhammad and I will be the Masters of Ceremony for today's event. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the panel discussion on integrating impact management in Islamic social finance. Jointly organized by the World Bank Group's Inclusive Growth and Sustainable Finance Hub in Malaysia, UNDP Country Office for Malaysia, Singapore and Brunei Darussalam, and the Islamic Development Bank's Centre of Excellence, Kuala Lumpur. The focus of this inaugural joint panel discussion is to unpack the potential of integrating impact measurement and reporting frameworks into Islamic social finance systems and applications. With that, I would like to welcome Dr. Yasuhiko Matsuda, World Bank Country Manager for Malaysia, to give the first welcoming speech.
Well, Mr. Muhammad Abida, Head of the Islamic Development Bank Centre of Excellence, Kuala Lumpur, and Ms. Manon Bernier, Deputy Resident Representative, UNDP, Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good afternoon. Selamat tengah hari. Very welcome to Sasana Kijan. I'm deeply honored today to be here at this occasion to welcome you all to the IDB UNDP World Bank panel discussion on integrating impact management and measurement in Islamic social finance. So first, let me begin by thanking our partners, the Islamic Development Bank and UNDP, for co-hosting this panel discussion and focusing our attention on this important topic, which is quite timely. As we all know that we have gone through, the entire world has gone through difficult times, and throughout, including in Malaysia, the use of Islamic social finance has been very important. As we all know, the pandemic has caused the unprecedented reversal in poverty. Poverty reduction. The world was on its course to reducing poverty steadily, and then that trend was reversed. And at the same time, inequality has been exacerbated. So a number of poor and vulnerable people and households have suffered greatly. Just as we thought that the pandemic might have come under control, we have faced additional challenges in the forms of the war in Ukraine and inflation that's really tightening the living conditions of a large number of people. By the World Bank estimate, these things may have resulted in additional 75 to 95 million more people in extreme poverty in 2022 compared to the scenario without these adversities. So the need is tremendous for caring help that all of us could provide. And as I said, these phenomena have really impacted the vulnerable groups disproportionately: women, school-age children, workers in the informal sector, and others. Small businesses have been hit very hard, in particular, and SMEs comprise something like 2/3 of the global employment. Here in Malaysia, it's actually much more than 2/3, and in terms of the number of firms, and around half of the global GDP. So the impact not only on the social side but also on the economy has been quite considerable. In that sense, Malaysia is a leader in the use of Islamic social finance to protect vulnerable populations. So, for example, Zakat has been institutionalized as an integral part of the social protection framework in the country. And during the pandemic, Zakat institutions allocated more than 171 million ringgit. So that's around $40 million to support the needy. In addition, Bank Negara Malaysia has introduced a program called ITECAD, which is a blended social finance program by Islamic banks that offer seed capital, microfinancing, and structured training to micro entrepreneurs in collaboration with implementing partners. So there have been a number of instruments, and it is very important, however, to evaluate the effectiveness of these various programs, initiatives, and interventions so that we achieve the outcomes that are desired for social purposes, and at the same time, give confidence to those who may consider use of those instruments going forward. So today's focus on impact management measurement is, in that sense, very, very critical. Measuring, verifying, and reporting the outcomes of Islamic social financing, like most other public policy interventions, right, will enhance the transparency and credibility of these interventions, providing contributors, organizations, beneficiaries, and the public with the confidence that these measures indeed work, that they achieve the objectives that people intend to contribute toward. And these impact measurements can also create positive feedbacks for policymakers so that they can then use the information to further improve the design of such interventions, learn what to do, what not to do, and making sure that these tools collectively can be more impactful. So we have a distinguished panel of experts today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing their discussions and learning about the topic. We just yesterday launched our report on the halal economy, and I was sitting in the exact same place. We also had an excellent panel discussion from which I personally learned quite a bit, and so I'm really hoping to enriching discussion today. To conclude, I'd like to tell you that for the World Bank, the work on Islamic finance is one of the key pillars of the engagement here in Malaysia, in close partnership with Bank Negara, Securities Commission, and other public sector partners, as well as Islamic Development Bank, UNDP, and other development partners. So thank you again for our collaboration and partnership, and also for this opportunity for me to offer a few remarks to open this very important and interesting event. I wish everyone a very good and insightful discussion today.
Thank you, Dr. Yasuhiko. Next, please welcome Ms. Manon Bernier, Deputy Resident Representative for UNDP, Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam, to give her speech.
Dr. Matsuda and Mr. Abida, distinguished delegates and ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all. It's really my pleasure to represent UNDP to open this forum together with our partner from IsDB and the World Bank. First, let me extend a very big thank you to the Association of Islamic Banking and Financial Institutions of Malaysia for hosting the Global Islamic Finance Forum 2022 and allow a number of partners to hold pre-events like the one we will have today and enrich the conversations. And also a big thank you to IsDB and World Bank, long-standing partners of UNDP. And really it's a pleasure to always work with you, your teams, in advancing our common agenda for sustainable development and achieving the sustainable development goals. So we know that Islamic finance and SDG-sensitive impact investment are both founded on similar rigorous ethical and social criteria. Criteria that emphasize inclusiveness and a deeper and a more cooperative meaning of business-society relations. So while we see a growth in Islamic finance, we see that now Islamic finance is expanding to the domain of fintech and that it's enhancing financial inclusion and that more funds are channeled through those types of markets. There's really an expansion. A good proportion of these transactions are related to zakah, wakaf, and sadaqah. But we know we've known, and this was clearly mentioned in the Addis Ababa Agenda 2015 on financing sustainable development, that actually there's sufficient fund in public and private finances to achieve the sustainable development goals, but those funds are not necessarily properly channeled. If we want to achieve those goals, we need to make sure that those investments are channeled and aligned to sustainable development goals. And this is why we are here today, to talk about integrating impact management and measurement in Islamic finance. And we're convinced that by aligning Islamic finance and SDG agenda, we can really able to shift from billion to trillions that are needed to achieve the sustainable development goals. No? But why talking about impact now? Isn't Islamic finance already aligned with the SDG, because it already has, a positive and want to make a positive impact on development? But we know that we're gathering today in a world that is unsustainable, that I think all agree that the current system of internalizing profits and externalizing costs is not sustainable. We are a world of triple crisis, still recovering from COVID, I think, from the pandemic, the ongoing climate crisis and geopolitical risk. There is no, I think, other options for us to change the way how we look at investment, because all those crises are threatening the lives of many people. And I think you've given some quite important numbers in your introductions. No? So I think these crises serve to really expose and exacerbate the existing inequalities in the world. And tell us that we are failing to achieve the sustainable development goals. But on the other end, there is more and more awareness, and this is why I'm very pleased to see so many people of you today, that there is an interest in sustainability in recent years that shows that there's realization that it is in all our joint interest to address such issues of climate change and inequality. So impact management, why do we want to talk about impact management? And what does it mean exactly? It's trying to proactively managing the managerial positive and negative impact intended and unintended economic and social environmental impact of our business and investment on others. Well, we hear a lot about the ESG and its importance because it looks at companies' environmental, social, and governance practices. Impact investment will focus more on social and environmental outcome, and how really those investments are actually producing tangible social good. And by using impact management and measurement, we are able to demonstrate that positive impact on both social and the environment. So by integrating impact management and measurement in Islamic finance will help organizations to first clearly align their business goal with sustainable development and the SDGs, the target of the SDGs, make more informed choices between options to optimize their contributions towards sustainability, but also enhance transparency, which will help accountability with stakeholders. No? So we are convinced that integrating stronger and rigorous impact management and measurement will strengthen Islamic finance by assisting informed decision and manifesting the overall impact of Malaysia, Wakaf, Zakah, and Sadaqah are already creating in society. In UNDP, we have been engaging with many countries on Islamic finance as a vital component of the overall mobilization of financing, the immense financing that is needed to achieve the SDGs. We have present in 170 countries, and we had unique advantage in mobilizing Islamic finance organizations to finance the SDGs, and while integrating impact management in investment, and we will hear about it in our panel discussion later. So in 2016, together with the Islamic Development Bank, UNDP launched the Global Islamic Finance and Impact Investing platform, aimed at strengthening Islamic finance and impact investing as leading enablers of the global trust towards implementation of the SDGs. So the investment platform launches Green Sukuk initiative in 2008 in collaboration with Securities Commission. So Malaysia already leading on the Islamic finance, and is the Islamic Corporation for the Development of the Private Sector and of the Islamic Development Bank. So here in Malaysia, I think there's already a lot of very positive experiences and stories to share with the world as well. So together with the Islamic Bank, UNDP has initiated case studies, compilation project to showcase important innovation in Islamic finance in both Malaysia and Indonesia that we hope can help and support other countries who wants to further align their Islamic finance with sustainable development agenda. So together with the World Bank and the Islamic Development Bank, UNDP look forward to support the Islamic and continue our engagement with the Islamic finance sector and have more programs, work streams with all the different stakeholders. So I really look forward to the discussion today and to further engagements as a result of that discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Manon. Our final address will be given by Mr. Muhammad Abida, Head of the Islamic Development Bank's Kuala Lumpur Center of Excellence.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ms. Manon Bernier, Deputy Resident Representative of UNDP Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei, Dar es Salaam. Yasuhiko Matsuda, World Bank Country Manager for Malaysia. Distinguished panelists, participants, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and Salamat Sijaharta. At the outset, allow me to begin by expressing my appreciation to IsDB partners of this panel discussion, the World Bank and UNDP, for the excellent collaboration in co-organizing this event. I would like to take this opportunity to extend our warmest greeting and congratulate Malaysia for having successfully overcoming COVID-19, which allowed us to meet face-to-face today and to be part of the Global Islamic Finance Forum 2022, physically with the theme of Take the Reins. I would like, in this regard, to thank the Association of Islamic Banking and Financial Institutions of Malaysia and Bank Negara Malaysia for taking the lead in generating active discourse around the topics, important topics such as fintech and digitization, Islamic social finance, value-based intermediation, VBI, and the intersection between sustainability and technology. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the theme selected for the panel discussion today around integrating impact management and measurement in Islamic social finance is timely and important. In fact, Islamic finance and socially responsible investing have been rapidly growing in the areas of finance over the last 2 decades. Also, Islamic finance can be an important, non-traditional and promising source of financing for the SDGs, particularly for developing countries who are facing substantial financial gap for achieving these targets, a gap which was exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. As you may be aware, the IsDB Group, the Islamic Development Bank, in its effort to support its member countries, access additional resources, approved a strategic preparedness and response plan for COVID-19 since early 2020, and through the program covering health emergency responses, economic restoration and recovery, IsDB extended $3.6 billion to support its member countries in dealing with the pandemic. Also, the IsDB has introduced a significant number of innovative and transformative initiatives to empower youth, women, and the most vulnerable groups. For example, the IsDB Economic Empowerment Approach is an innovative initiative that strengthens vulnerable member countries. This is manifested through the establishment of programs such as Microfinance Support Program, Youth Employment Program, and strengthening the economic resilience of vulnerable enterprises program. The bank was also managing and mobilizing resources for development of trust funds and has established impact investing funds, such as the Economic Empowerment Fund for Palestinian people, with an amount of $500 million. This program helps vulnerable populations to access to profitable economic opportunities, increase their social status, and become fulfilled citizens, positively contributing to their societies. An important sector that IsDB had invested in is positioning awqaf financing at the frontier of development practice. Awqaf are considered as a form of Islamic social finance. They have played a critical role in Islamic history and civilization and provide a powerful tool to fill the SDG financing gap, especially given their strong resource mobilization potential. Toward this end, APIF, the Awqaf Properties Investment Fund of IsDB, was established in 2001 to promote the role of Awqaf as a tool of development via using modes of Islamic finance to support the development, renovation, and purchase of properties to be used as Awqaf. APIF is indeed an impact investment funding mechanism providing both financial and social impact returns to investors. Through APIF, IsDB has succeeded in operationalizing Awqaf financing. It succeeded in taking the endowment model, practiced both in the Muslim world as well in the modern West, like in universities, and transforming this model into a tool of development policy. APIF started this operation with a capital of $50 million. As of October 2020, the capital of APIF stands at $87.7 million with 16 fund participants. Over the years, APIF financed projects to help generate additional income for diverse beneficiaries such as government, Awqaf institutions, research centers, endowment funds, charitable NGOs, orphanage, and universities. A study was conducted in December 2019 by IsDB on the development impact of APIF and has clearly showed its importance in supporting charity-based value chain, supporting the activities of NGOs in areas of fragility and conflict, bringing real sustainability to development projects by supplementing these projects with Awqaf components. Furthermore, APIF has an impact investment fund with each investment potentially has the following triple financial impact on the availability of development resources. It directly supports the financing of major real estate projects with a lasting income generation potential. The average total size of approved project is $18.9 million. It mobilizes and crowds in additional financing resources from IsDB, the beneficiary organization, and philanthropists, and it revitalizes previously endowed properties, unlocking massive untapped resources. Nearly 1 million square meters of built-up areas has been financed. These are some indicators that could be used for measuring the impact of such investments in Awqaf. Finally, I would like to note that in addition to APIF, IsDB has been working on establishment of similar funds for Awqaf promotion dedicated to Saudi Arabia and Malaysia. In this regard, IsDB and Bank Pembangunan, BPMB, and Yayasan Waqf Malaysia have jointly signed recently on 20 July 2022 a technical study agreement for the establishment of an Awqaf Properties Investment Fund, APIF, in Malaysia. And the Center of Excellence is working to implement this study with Bank Pembangunan and Yayasan Waqf. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the IsDB Center of Excellence in Kuala Lumpur was officially launched in March 2021 with the objective to facilitate comprehensive ecosystem development, value chain integration, and market expansion in three main focus areas, namely Islamic finance, halal industries ecosystem, and science and technology and innovation. The Center of Excellence leverages the reverse linkage modality, which is the technical cooperation in IsDB, and the resource mobilization as cross-cutting focus areas to enable tapping into the expertise and resources of member countries to scale up the size and impact of its program. The Center of Excellence identifies and creates the demand for comprehensive ecosystem developments in its focus area, develop tailored solutions to address the needs of these countries, and mobilizes the capabilities and the resources of ISDB Group, Malaysia, and other member countries, investors, and development partners to implement integrated solution based on a win-win approach. Among its initiative, as Manon mentioned, the Center of Excellence was pleased to conduct jointly with UNDP a joint report on Islamic finance case studies documenting the Malaysian experience in Sukuk Brihatin, value-based intermediation, VBI, and fintech and in Islamic social finance, and also the Indonesian experience in fintech in Islamic social finance and Islamic microfinance. This report not only outlines the processes, but also the importance of mainstreaming and integrating Islamic social finance in the practice of Islamic capital market, banking, and fintech. I would like to take this opportunity to express sincere thanks and appreciation for UNDP team for the excellent cooperation in conducting these studies. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed our hope that today's discussion would lead to development of impact framework and measurement in the Islamic social finance space. The overarching objective is indeed to realize the social impact, hence the importance of impact measurement. A clear impact framework and measurement would enhance visibility and effectiveness of the process towards strengthening the stature of Islamic finance in advancing the overarching agenda of inclusion, social justice, and impactful investment. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Muhammad. Thank you to all our honored guests for your speeches and insights. And now I would like to welcome our guests of honor to the stage for a short photo session. Can the usher please help the guests? Thank you to our guests of honor. Ushers, please help them back to their seats. Thank you. Okay. Moving on to the main event of the day, we will begin the panel discussion on integrating impact management and measurement in Islamic social finance. As you can see on the screen, we will have a short Q&A session at the end of this discussion. Please refer to the QR code on the screen with the hashtag ISFMY2022 for you to submit your questions. You may also ask them directly to the panel if you wish to. Please raise your hands during the Q&A and our usher will hand you the mic. We would also appreciate it if you could submit your feedback via Slido with the same QR code, hashtag ISFMY2022, before the end of the event. Before we begin, allow me to briefly introduce our panelists and moderator. Our four panelists for today are Ms. Devahuti Chowdhury, SDG Impact Specialist for UNDP Asia Pacific, who will be joining us remotely through Zoom. Datuk Professor Dr. Azmi Omar, President and CEO of the International Center for Education in Islamic Finance (INSIF. Mr. Raja Amir Shah Raja Azwa, CEO of HSBC Amanah Malaysia Berhad, and Mr. Muhammad Ramadan Fitri bin Alias, Head of Strategy for Maybank Islamic. This discussion will be moderated by Mr. Ahmad Hafiz Abdul Aziz, Financial Sector Specialist for the World Bank Group. Without further ado, please welcome our panelists and moderator to the stage to begin the session.
Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoons. Thank you, Ms. Shahira. First of all, my colleague, Mr. Abayomi, send his regard and apologies as he unable to join us today or to moderate this session due to unforeseen circumstances. However, I will do my best to moderate this session, don't worry. I also would like to thank all the speakers for joining us today. Today's topic is very timely, as we can see how Islamic social finance play a significant role in absorbing the shock during the pandemic. Moreover, it is also being leveraged as alternative financing, especially for micro, small, medium enterprise, as mentioned earlier by Dr. Yasuhiko in his opening remark. Similar to the sustainable finance space, the growing demands of impact reporting also for Islamic social finance, especially when more financial institutions and non-banking financial institutions start to integrate the Islamic social finance as part of their products and services. We hear there are issues of greenwashing, and several climate risk and sustainability reporting have been developed to mitigate the issue of greenwashing, such as TCFD, GRI, and so forth. Thus, to avoid impact washing, what we are here today, which is another angle, it is crucial to develop impact-based disclosure to complement those existing sustainability framework that can improve comparability and quality of disclosure. Before we start our discussion, let me introduce our four distinguished panelists. Start with Ms. Divahuti, who is connecting online. Ms. Divahuti is the SDG Impact Specialist at UNDP for the Asia Pacific region. She brings with her over 16 years of experience in operation, management, consulting, research, and impact measurement and management across development teams, such as digital inclusive finance, education, healthcare, agri-finance, and others. An advocate of using unified framework like the SDGs to create and communicate impact, Divahuti focused her time to work with UNDP, country office team, government stakeholders, and the private sectors to build market intelligence to identify and activate SDG enabling investment opportunity for countries in the region. Her work also involved assisting the private sectors to adopt the SDG impact standards to help them authenticate their contribution across the impact spectrum. Our second panelist, Prof. Datuk Dr. Azmi Omar, is our neighbor to Southern Kijang. Maybe you can visit inside the new campus. It's just nearby, walking distance from here. So Dr. Azmi is served as the President and CEO of INSEF, the Global University of Islamic Finance, since October 2017. Prior to this, he was the Director General of Islamic Research and Training Institute, Islamic Development Bank, where he held the position for 6 years and a senior professor and university administrator at the International Islamic University Malaysia for almost 30 years. At IRTI, Dr. Azmi pioneered and introduced many innovative policy research which culminated into flagship reports such as IRTI Islamic Social Finance Report and IDB World Bank Global Report on Islamic Finance. Dr. Azmi also advised and provided technical assistance to a number of IDB members countries in their implementation of Islamic finance. He was a member of the External Advisory Group for IMF, Interdepartmental Working Committee on Islamic Finance, and Board of Trustee of RFI. He is also a member of the AC of Malaysia Sharia Advisory Council as the Islamic finance expert to the authority and as the Islamic finance expert to the Authority Monetary Brunei Darussalam. In addition, he also served as a member of Sharia Committee to Bank Rakyat, Etika Takaful, and MUFG Bank Malaysia. Dr. Azmi was awarded the most outstanding individual contribution to Islamic finance in the Cliff Islamic Finance Award in 2015. Our next speaker is Raja Amir, is the CEO of HSBC Amanah and has over 16 years experience in finance, in particular Islamic banking and Malaysian stock market. He is responsible for executing the HSBC Group strategy for Islamic banking in Malaysia, driving sustainable leadership and value-based implementation efforts while spearheading the development of talent, particularly in relation to Islamic finance and sustainability within the group. In recent time, he led the government of Malaysia 800 million sustainability sukuk, being the world's first ever sustainability sukuk by a sovereign, as well as the issuance of Yinsan Holding Berhad 1 billion ringgit 5-year sustainability linked sukuk wakalah. Malaysia first ever sustainability linked sukuk. Through his leadership, HSBC Amanah has also been awarded the coveted the Asset AAA Islamic Finance Award, Islamic ESG Bank of the Year for the 3 for the 3rd consecutive year and the best Islamic trade finance bank for the 5th consecutive year. Our next speaker is Dr. Ramadan. Dr. Ramadan is the head of strategy at Maybank Group Islamic Banking. He oversees the bank's strategic business plan towards achieving its business goal while making a positive impact on its customer, shareholder, and community. Concurrently, Dr. Ramadan also oversees Maybank Islamic Strategic Communication, Research and Islamic Finance Center of Excellence Initiative. Prior to becoming the head of strategy, he led key role across various business segments within Maybank Group, including Islamic Capital Market, Suku and Sharia compliant IPO, Sharia and Product Management. Over his 15 years of experience, he received his PhD in Law of Islamic Finance in 2020 from Southwest University of London. Thank you again to all the distinguished speakers. I think let's start our discussion. So the first round, I will ask all the each speakers to introduce their institution and briefly explain currently initiative related to impact management and management. So I think we start with Ms. Devahuti, who is connecting online. Ms. Devahuti, you can hear me? Ms. Devahuti?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I think maybe you can introduce briefly about your institutions and your current work related to this topic, please. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Hafiz, and for the warm introduction, and also hello to all the panelists, who are going to be discussing this very important subject today on integrating impact management and measurement in Islamic social finance. And this is also very heartwarming for me because of the work that we're trying to drive within the UNDP. Our mission, especially the team that I come from, which is SDG Impact, which is a smaller team within the Sustainable Finance Hub. The idea really is to put sustainability at the heart of global finance. And our team especially is looking to see how can we crowd in more private sector capital to help achieve the SDGs. And the positive trend that we're looking at, and something that Manon also touched upon, is that more and more businesses and investors are now recognizing the important link between sustainability as well as future profitability. And our work at SDG Impact and within the UNDP at large is aimed to make it easier for businesses and investors, and I'm sure a lot of them are sitting in the room today, to realize their sustainability and SDG intentions, so how to take intention to action, and also their commitments in a holistic, credible, and accountable way. And moving our lens a little bit into the region we are in, which is Asia Pacific, I think it's a very special region and a very important market for us. Because if you see, according to the latest UNSCAP numbers, because of the perfect storm that has been created because of supply chain disruptions, the ongoing pandemic that we're continuing to experience, the deepening inequities that two of our speakers have already touched upon. And because of this, Asia Pacific may not achieve even 10% of its 2030 commitments on the SDGs. And ladies and gentlemen, if Asia doesn't achieve its SDGs, which is home to 63% of the world's population, clearly the world doesn't achieve its SDGs. So having said that, and I don't want to sound like the voice of doom and gloom, but, there is also a lot of opportunities and potential in Asia Pacific, especially countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, which are some of the fastest growing digital economies. There is significant domestic growth because that can be achieved by nurturing MSMEs. A lot of it, which are also the beneficiaries, direct beneficiaries of social finance. And there is also availability of cost-effective resources, which makes it very interesting for investors. And there are significant contributions that we can make towards climate-related challenges as well. So this is definitely one of the most attractive investment destinations in terms of regions, which is very interesting for Asia and also for markets like Malaysia. So the caveat really is that how do we make sure that with all of this investment interest in the region, the impact that is created is purposeful, regenerative, and is accountable to the people who are experiencing these impacts. And that is where we see the role of our team and also our collaborators, many of whom are sitting in the room. And I'm sure all of us will walk out as friends and partners in this mission. But we're really trying to drive how we can be prepared with tools and aids that can rally with you and the private sector to outpace development challenges and with responsibility. So that's a brief introduction about me and the work that we do at UNDP SDG Impact. And back to you, Hafiz.
Thank you, Ms. Dibahuti. We will have more questions after this for you. Next, Dr. Azmi.
Okay, thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Our VIPs from World Bank, UNDP, as well as from IsDB, our moderator and fellow panel members. Again, thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts on this. In the first round, we are asked to talk about our institutions and what are we doing in the context of supporting impact and impact measurement. Let me just give you a brief background for INSEF first. As always, because I have to talk about INSEF, that's my role. A university established by Central Bank of Malaysia, dedicated towards study on Islamic finance and sustainability. So we only offer masters and PhD programs and professional certificates in the area, as I mentioned earlier on. I mean, my involvement in Islamic finance started way back many years ago, in the 1980s, when Islamic Bank was first established. I think if you look at the trace of the Islamic Bank, as being mentioned by our speakers here, I think the first approach of Islamic banking and Islamic finance was more towards providing alternative financing towards Muslim. And as we go along, questions starts being asked about what have you contributed? You mean that Islamic banking, have you contributed towards the overall socio-economic development of Muslims globally, be it in Malaysia and many other countries? So as INSEF, what we do is that we do research in that area. We try to find solutions. So what can banks or financial institutions do in order to address the issue of what we call socio-economic development, and now more importantly, the issue of economic disruption, as we said, the issue of global price inflation, income and wealth inequality. As a university, you cannot just continue to do research and be happy or produce your masters and PhD students. I think you need to address societal issues. And I learned a lot when I was at IDB. I think one of the question that is always debated is that what is the purpose of university education? Is it just to give a degree, or is it much more than that? And the answer is much more than that, and this is not the time to debate on that. But suffice to say that I think we need to find solutions. And I'm glad that as we start to re-examine ourselves Islamic finance, we realize that the importance of Islamic social finance, the importance of zakat, wakaf, sadaqah to be mainstream into Islamic finance. So now you see the role of UNDP. You mentioned earlier on about the first report, 2016. In fact, I was the one that led the project from IDB side. So we worked and produced that report, the 2016 report. So we realized it is important to address Islamic social finance and to put it as part of the mainstream. So what we do at INSEF, we establish a Center of Social Finance, Islamic Social Finance. We do research, we do advisory, and more importantly is we now work on impact indicators. I think one of the key things that we know, and this is again the question of trust, we have been providing support towards Islamic Social Finance institution, but the question to those who are providing that support is that, how do you know it is effective? So measurement, trust, impact indicators are very important, but we are still new at this so-called area. We're still new. I think in the area of sustainability, you have that. But I think in the area of zakat, wakaf, it is still new. So we have some indicators, and of course, those indicators must be specific to a particular institution or sector. We cannot have one straight, one jacket solution. So you must be specific to that. And I'm glad that many institutions in Malaysia, Indonesia are working in these areas. We bring together the Islamic finance together with Islamic social finance, and we now use what we call the objectives of Sharia. Maqasid al-Sharia as one of the, the main criteria. And developing that, I know, for example, Bank Negara is working, Securities Commission is also working in this area, as well as our friends, as you mentioned, in Indonesia, are also working on similar area. The whole idea is to bring impactful Islamic finance and Islamic social finance and to achieve the objective of Sharia. I think I will stop at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Azmi. I believe there will be more questions after this, even from the audience. Raja Amir?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and assalamu alaikum, and a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If I can just start by giving a brief introduction to myself as well as the organization I represent. So I'm the CEO of HSBC Amanah, and HSBC Amanah was established in 2008. We received our Islamic banking license. We are the first Islamic bank in Malaysia, we're the first foreign owned Islamic bank in Malaysia to have received our banking license. And we use Malaysia essentially, the HSBC group focuses on Malaysia as a key hub in which we utilize our Islamic financing products and services because of the conducive nature of the ecosystem in Malaysia. So what was previously, before we were prevalent in markets such as UK, India, Saudi Arabia, and so on, now the only 3 markets in which we operate fully from an Islamic perspective is Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, as well as the UAE to a certain extent. But in terms of products and services, Malaysia is, we have the full suite. So coming from an international Islamic bank, rather an international bank, and shaping the focus on Islamic finance was one that I need to, probably give credibility and kudos to my predecessors who, managed to convince HSBC Group that this is an area where we need to focus on. Obviously from a financial perspective as well as from a relevance perspective, because if you don't offer Islamic finance in Malaysia, you're obviously not relevant. So what we did was that, and my personal experience within the context of the topic today, which is reporting and impact measurement, really came around in 2018 when HSBC Amanah decided that we want to issue the world's first SDG Sukuk. And this was, what we did when we were launching this product was that we were looking at what was the prevalent products in the market, which was issued by HSBC Group. So there was a green bond, there was an SDG bond, and we wanted to make it an SDG Sukuk because we wanted to, be in alignment with the SDG goals. So we aligned with seven out of the 17 SDG goals. And we wanted to issue it in Malaysia because we wanted to support the capital markets in Malaysia. And specifically, we wanted to issue it in ringgit because obviously that's our balance sheet. So that was 2018. We issued the world's first SDG Sukuk by an FI. It was 500 million ringgit. And we deployed it to a number of proceeds which were in alignment with the SDGs. So we used the money for a green building in KL. We financed a water desalination plant in Kuala, Terengganu Utara. And we also financed a renewable energy plant in Terengganu. So, when we did that issuance in 2018, my initial concerns were, will we have enough projects, to earmark? Because as we know, if you don't earmark sufficient projects, it's not an event of default. Yeah? So it's not a credit event of default under a green sukuk or a SDG sukuk, but it is reputational damage if you did not deploy the proceeds. So before we came to the market, we were about 90% covered, and we needed to see on a yearly basis what was the maturity profile of those loans. And I tell you honestly, we were concerned that we won't be able to deploy the proceeds, but alhamdulillah, the sukuk matures next year in 2023. And as of today, we are covered 600 million. So we've managed to utilize the proceeds accordingly. And then, so that's on the sukuk front. And then in 2017, we became one of the pioneering members of Bank Negara's community of practitioners. So there was only about 3 banks initially, and we were one of them. And we felt that this was a fantastic process whereby we can really work with the industry to differentiate ourselves from the competitors, and also to ingrain the real DNA of Islamic finance, which is to provide social capital and also impactful purposes. So with that journey on value-based intermediation, which really started in 2017, in 2020, we decided to up the ante slightly, and we launched what we call an internal project called Project Cocoon. So Project Cocoon really, it's what it is a cocoon. We're coming out of a cocoon whereby we're changing our whole lens on business. So obviously profit is important. We are not an NGO. We need to acknowledge that. We are, a profitable organization, but it's not the only thing that we should be looking at. We are also looking at our impact of the people, impact of the prosperity, and impact of the planet as well. So in 2020, we went through the motions of the process. We got approval from Asia Pacific. We went all the way up to Group. They supported the initiative for HSBC Amanah, which is an Islamic bank, to become the embodiment of what we as a group want to embrace in sustainability. So they blessed this journey, and we then launched Project Cocoon, which was a 24-month program where we will start to embed value-based intermediation, looking at the 3 Ps and so on. So I'm proud to say that just last week at the SRI conference, we managed to launch our framework. So again, this journey of Project Cocoon is not just about a framework, but that is the apex of what this initiative is. Within that initiative is also it's encompassing financial solutions. So what are the products that we offer to our clients? External advocacy, we are members of JC3 where we undertake training for the industry. So ensuring people are not left behind because training is very important. Capacity building, which falls under training. Cultural transformation, we ask people, our staff, to look at things differently. What is your carbon footprint? How do you travel to work? How are you disposing of your e-waste? So, people have become extremely passionate about this, and it's really something that you need to take charge of. And then finally is external disclosures. So we have started to disclose our TCFD in 2021, which is 3 years ahead of the mandatory 2024. We did it again in 2022. If you ask me, is it a complete document? Is everything in there? I would say that it's a pretty good base document. We have a lot to learn, but we were the first bank in the market to do it. And it was not easy to get approval from the group again, because group is, why are you doing this, right? And we had to say that this is under disclosures that we want to do. And we also started to disclose our United Nations Development COP as well. So last week at the IIFN SRI conference, we announced our triple bottom line framework, and I'll go into it, slightly a bit more about how are we actually migrating towards measuring the assets. Who are we financing? What is the impact of the financing that we provide? And what is our intention in the long run? So I'll probably stop there.
Thank you, Raja Azmi. Dr. Ramadan.
Thank you, Hafiz, moderator, distinguished sponsors and organizers of the forum, my respected fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to briefly introduce about Islamic Social Finance under Maybank Islamic, which is one component within Maybank Group, as well as the practice or the infusion of impact measurement and impact management within our Islamic social finance activities. I think since the establishment of Maybank Islamic as a standalone entity back in 2008, so we declare our corporate zakat on daily basis, on yearly basis. And we also allocated 10 million for our corporate cash waqaf in 2008. But because in Malaysia, we have to work with the religious authority, so we started with Majlis Agama Islam Perak. And the mandate for that cash waqaf is very much on the education, as well as on the economic empowerment. And after that, subsequent to that, we start infuse and embed the charitable element within our product. For example, we set aside 0.2% of the commission raised from our credit card, for example, for the charity fund. So basically, this is how we build up the fund for Islamic social finance. But I have to be very candid here that when we start, this is very much, a lot of our programs are very much one-off assistance. Yeah. And in 2019, we have a strategic decision that we want to slowly reduce the portion of one-off assistance, and we want to really develop and accelerate on Islamic social finance. So the underpinning idea was that we want to shift from helping to empowering. We want to shift from output-based to outcome-based. So based on these underpinnings, we launched our Islamic social finance in 2019. And of course, when we do the gap analysis, based on the previous practices and experience, we identified that the weakest link within the previous practices is actually on the impact measurement and impact management. Yes, we are quite good in terms of showing the numbers of our zakah. We have the declared cash waqaf for the programs that we have together with Majlis Agama Islam Negeri Perak, for example. We have Sadaqah Fund, which is quite sizable on yearly basis, except for 2020, because we know 2020 is quite a unique year. Yeah, but we realized that when we looking at the impact or outcome, actually we are not really able to tell the complete story in terms of the outcomes, in terms of the impact out of these programs funded by the Zakat, Waqaf, as well as Sadaqah by Maybank Islamic. So we also admitted that we are not good in this area. So we collaborate. So one of our initial partners, we collaborate with Business for Social Impact, a UK-based consultant. We developed the very basic framework for impact measurement and impact management for our zakat-based program. And at the same time, we get help from SIRIM, for example, to do some validation, because like our moderator mentioned, the last thing that we want, we do the greenwashing or the impact washing, if you like. So we have SIRIM to do validation. So whatever numbers that we announce to the public in our sustainability report, in our MIB sustainability statement, are validated by a third party who are expert in terms of ensuring that we fulfill certain standards when it comes to the impact and the outcomes reporting. So of course, this is a journey, Brother Hafiz. I want to share a bit more in terms of the challenges, in terms of the way forward for Islamic social finance. But I think by having a clear methodology in evaluating the impact and the assessment, actually it helps us in terms of refining our investment strategy. At the same time, I think for the context of Maybank Islamic, it helps to re-energize our workforce. So now even we have more motivations why we have to work hard to achieve our KPI, because some of the beneficiaries or the stakeholders of our business is the community, including the underserved and unserved segments. I stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ramadan. I think one of the things that you highlight is the role of the second opinion, the third party to verify, like Dr. Azmi mentioned, to build a trust. Okay, I think now we go to the second round. I think Ms. Divahuti also here, like she mentioned earlier. So I think my question to Ms. Divahuti, with your vast experience in this impact management and measurement, especially related to SDG impact, can you share with us what will be the best practices, especially for financial institutions to adopt this practice, and what will be the key challenge and your recommendation for a country like Malaysia? And maybe you can relate with today's topic on social finance. Ms. Divahuti, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Hafiz, and thanks, fellow panelists, for those opening remarks. I think there is a lot of insight into the way Islamic finance is structured and faith-based finance generally, and how they share, some of the principles around inclusivity and, making sure the products and services that are resulted from such investments are affordable, accessible, and available, especially for last mile populations. So really a lot of inspiring work already being done. But I also heard from our fellow panelists about some of the challenges. And I think for that, I would just like to use some, a framing presentation. If I can request the organizers to put up the slides. So as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, the work that we do is essentially looking at two things. And again, picking on some of the opening remarks made by fellow panelists, I was very interested to hear, for instance, one of the pillars of our work is looking at managing for impact. So we're not simply talking about reporting, right? We're talking about what kind of things does a business or an investor need to do on a day-to-day basis, which helps them make better decisions to drive investment capital to where it is required the most. So last mile populations, underserved regions, underbanked regions, so on and so forth. And are the people who are experiencing the impact of these businesses and investments, do they really have a voice in terms of how their feedback is being used to tweak or sort of adjust your systems and processes? So that entire thing is sort of defining what one of our pillars of our work is, which is managing for impact. And we have introduced a set of SDG impact standards for different asset classes. And I heard some of our panelists talking about bonds. So we have them for bond issuers. I'm sure there are people in the audience who are looking at private equity or debt kind of investments, or we may have venture capital kind of firms as well. So we have a separate set of standards for this particular asset class. Then, of course, we have separate set of standards, again, for people working on the ground. So these are enterprises and businesses. And then yet another set of standards for development finance institutions like the World Bank, AIBIM, and others, who may find it useful to understand, the kind of development finance that they're putting into some of these emerging markets. How can that be sort of authenticated for its contribution to the SDGs? So that's one significant part of the work that we do, and I'll speak shortly about our experience and what these tools can, how these tools can help fulfill some of the aspirations that our fellow panelists were also talking about. The other thing, and we're not going to talk a lot about it, but it's something very interesting that we are doing, is also understanding where is it that the capital needs to be deployed, in terms of understanding that if financial flows go into these sectors, subsectors, or investment opportunities, it can actually spur or unlock capital for the SDGs, ensure that the beneficiaries that should be benefited from such investments actually are able to access that fund and the impact thereof, and that it also creates commercial returns. Because I do see one of our panelists also spoke about that, we can't operate as an NGO. We need to have sustainability, both in terms of commercial viability as well as deep development impact. So the other pillar of our work is actually focused on bringing together this market intelligence in the form of what we call SDG investor maps. We are doing several of these across the globe. We've already produced such maps for 24 countries, and there are more 20 in pipeline, Malaysia being one of them. So this panel discussion is actually very timely, and I'm very happy to hear some of these feedback and insights from our panelists that can help us develop a market intelligence tool for Malaysia. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So essentially what we are trying to do, by putting together these standards and by this market intelligence, we're trying to therefore drive how businesses and investors can actually embed sustainability in business as usual for all capital flows. I mean, that's the ideal world, right? So we're not simply talking about social finance or impact capital, but we're trying to see how this can be part of all capital flows. And again, just to reiterate, through the standards, we are able to convey how you can contribute meaningfully to the SDGs. And through our market intelligence in these SDG investor maps, we can tell you about where and what kind of capital should be going into some of these sectors and subsectors in order to achieve the SDGs. Next thing, please. So clearly, I mean, I think, all the panelists also reiterated this, as well as some of the opening remarks, that in order to achieve the SDGs, or if we want to look at the principles of inclusivity, equity, etc., and to put the world on a more sustainable and equitable path, we do need a transformational shift in mindsets and management decision making. And the reason I'm saying this is, I'm just going to throw some data at you. So flows into ESG labeled assets, they reached about $93 billion in Q3 of last year, according to Morgan Stanley. And about $35 trillion of world's assets under management were invested in ESG strategies in 2020. And these are projected to reach about $50 trillion in just 3 years from now. So let's take a moment and digest these numbers, because these are not insignificant numbers. So clearly there is, a lot of ESG tagging as well as green tagging or SDG tagging that is going on with these funds, where they're trying to show that there is that intention to sort of reach impact. Yet, the SDG financing gaps have widened. I mean, and we're seeing some of the impacts on the ground, right? Climate issues and challenges are not looming anymore. They're right here at our doorstep. Inequities are even higher, so on and so forth. So we spoke about that perfect storm in some of the opening remarks as well. So there is this issue of, if there are these significant numbers that are indeed being tagged as ESG or green or SDG, what is the kind of impact that we're able to realize? So there is definitely a big gap. Next slide, please. So yeah, I mean, this is just to sort of, put the data that I just discussed with you in context, that, what got us here and the problems that we've created till now, we can't be on the same trajectory, and we can't look at solutions based on the same problems. We really have to transform the way we are thinking. Next slide, please. So it is with this objective why we sort of created these SDG impact standards, which can help organizations put sustainability at the core, like I said, but also very importantly, help us see, self-assess, as well as do independent assurance to see if we are indeed on track, heading in the right direction, and with sufficient speed, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, that's very important. It's not just now I don't think we are at a time, where we can simply talk about, yeah, this is nice to do, or, we should look at impact measurement and management. This is absolutely the center of our tension, right? It's absolutely urgent for us to do this with sufficient speed in order to achieve sustainability goals. Next slide, please. And therefore, it's great to say that, there are these standards and UNDP has developed these market intelligence tools. But what are some of the key challenges on the ground that we need to solve? So we've had several consultations as we've developed these market intelligence tool and as we are rolling out these SDG impact standards. In fact, interestingly, Malaysia is one of the first countries where we have a working group of impact-focused enterprises who are, as we speak, testing out these standards. So when we speak with them, one of the big challenges that they talk about is how do we really weld investment and impact thesis together, right? So some of the big issues is, okay, I may as a business or an investor have intention to create impact, but how do I make sure some of the change management systems are put in place to create those behavioral shifts from shareholder to stakeholder value? And I was very interested to hear from Mr. Azwa about the Cocoon project, where they're trying to see how they can change the lens of their businesses by looking at profit, but with purpose. And that's exactly the kind of challenge that a lot of investors and businesses are faced with. Also, what is the guidance on integrating impact into business as usual, right? So are there any standards or are there, any sort of guidance materials available? And I'm not only talking about businesses and investors with deep pockets, but even smaller companies that are starting off and who need to sort of integrate it as part of their company ethos. How do we make sure there are public assets and good material that is available in order for them to sort of realize impact? And of course, there is a huge question around accountability around negative externalities. A lot of impact measurement practices and management practices that we are seeing is completely blind to what kind of negative outcomes can a business or an investment lead to. So while there is a lot of focus on, this is our outreach, we're reaching women, we are working with youth and children, or the usual, we're creating jobs. But there is also a significant part of questions that need to be asked around what are some of the possible negative outcomes? Do you realize them? Do you acknowledge them? And do you do anything to sort of mitigate them in the long term? So it's basically not about saying that, oh, why are you creating negative outcomes? It's basically acknowledging that maybe negative outcomes will be realized, but we need to put in the right kind of practices in order to mitigate them. And finally, one of the big things we all struggle with is feedback loops created with impact data. So any sort of accountability or transparency that we have in reporting, it's not just about creating a sustainability reports. It's about making sure that that data flows back into your systems and processes in a way that can help you tweak your products and services to then adjust your impact thesis, your investment thesis, your business thesis, and ensure that your impacts are more positive and you look at more net positive impact and control for your negative outcomes. So these are for the businesses and investors, but also at the ecosystem level. If you can just, it's important that, for the entire pressure can't be just on businesses and investors. There are also some ecosystem related challenges. And this is not just for Malaysia, but across markets that we are seeing that there is lack of clarity on definitions and lack of, there is also lack of standardization. What do we really mean by impact? What does the spectrum of impact look like? Do I only call myself impactful if I'm avoiding to do harm? Or do I actually need to show that, I'm benefiting stakeholders? Am I really contributing to solutions? So even within the impact domain, there is a spectrum, and we need to understand what those definitions and standardize them for use. There is also inability of current frameworks to respond to greenwashing and SDG washing, some of which has also been echoed by a moderator and some of our speakers. There is definitely a lack of accountability for performance against ex-ante KPIs and stated objectives. So you start off with something saying that, yes, I want to sort of create this sort of impact. These are my stated objectives, but you don't do the commensurate measurement or the formative research that is required from day one when you're structuring a deal or when we are starting off a business that can help us sort of carry that narrative forward. So a lot of this work happens in retrospection, which often is not commensurate and leads to a lot of this greenwashing related problem. And also one of the big questions is, who is asking these questions, right? I mean, do we have the regulatory mandates to create impact benchmarks, including understanding what are the trade-offs for commercial returns? And therefore, what should be some of the risk-adjusted expectation when we sort of structure these funds or we sort of make these investments on start a business? So a lot of that information is also missing, something that, needs a lot of impetus from organizations like UNDP, World Bank, and others in sort of helping set those frameworks. And of course, last but not the least, the lack of impact education initiatives. I think there is, I can't say this enough, but the cadre of impact professionals is really a very rare and a very small one. We don't find many impact professionals who are able to drive these conversations within organizations that can help organizations embed it. And I think it's one of the big things and absolutely non-negotiable things that we need to take up as organizations to drive education initiatives and create more impact professionals on the ground. Next slide, please. So which brings me to the sustainability frameworks and the whole confusion around them. And what you see here is exactly, like an alphabet soup of different frameworks. So you have frameworks with principles of practice where we have PRI, we have the IFC open principles, we have GIIN, etc. We also have then the next is basically management or decision-making standards. So how do you sort of make sure that your everyday day-to-day decisions are essentially impactful? So that's where our standards come in, along with OECD, we have Social Value International, etc. Then we have metrics and taxonomies for reporting, taxonomies to understand what are those sectors and subsectors, within climate, within gender, where some of these investments should go through. Reporting, you have TCFD, GRI, so on and so forth. And then, of course, benchmarking data, and there are these different indexes that we have. So it can be very confusing for users to understand where is it that they should focus their energies on. And our whole idea is that, you need to sort of understand what are the metrics you want to use for reporting, which is one part of your decision making as an organization, and which are those standards based on which you can track your management approach, your transparency, your strategy. So those are basically your management or decision making frameworks, such as the SDG impact standards. Next slide, please. And then, of course, there is a spectrum of capital. This, I'm sure a lot of our panelists would also be familiar with, and our friends from Center for Impact Investing and Practices have brought this together from different sources. So you have traditional investing, then you have this whole spectrum from responsible investing to venture philanthropy to philanthropic donations. And somewhere in between, we also have instruments such as Islamic finance sitting across the spectrum. So it's very important to understand what your role is across the spectrum of different financing instruments. What are your expectations? What kind of focus areas do you have? Is it just ESG? So, mostly ESG frameworks are looking at the financial materiality of, environment or social sort of factors on your business. And if you start looking at more impactful frameworks, if you start looking at SDGs, for instance, it's the other way around. It's basically looking at environmental and social materiality of the financial decisions that you make as an investor or as a business. So essentially, looking at very scientifically how impact works, both as a financing instrument and then, of course, the impacts thereof that you need to calculate and commit to. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is just basically what I had already mentioned. We have SDG impact standards for different asset classes. I mean, if I put my business development hat on, I would love for you to look at some of these depending upon what sort of asset class you're working with, and would love to hear your feedback. But next slide, please. So yeah, I mean, one of the key things, and moderator sort of asked us this question that, what are some of the big strategies that we need to see or steps that we need to take? I think that's to understand that impact can't be done in a day, right? So these are baby steps that you need to take. And usually there are decisions that you need to make across your strategy building, which is essentially understanding how do you commit, understand, integrate, and set impact and sustainability goals, to making changes in your management approach. So how do you adjust, align, develop your management systems and processes to integrate impact? Then looking at transparency, a lot of our fellow panelists also touched upon this. What are some of the ethical practices to disclose impact, both intended as well as unintended, using empirical data and evidence, and often external validation of that data. And finally, in governance, how do you ensure, integrate, and embed sustainability into your governance framework, and making sure that that message is driven from a top to bottom, from your boardroom to the final person on the ground who is driving your businesses and investments. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So yeah, I mean, I've taken a lot of your time, but that's essentially one of the key things that I wanted to just set the framework for the discussion today, and also try to sort of throw up some questions and maybe not many answers, but I think it's part of an ongoing discussion, and I'm very happy and I'll be very glad to sort of be part of this discussion as we put the lens on social finance structures and Islamic finance to see how some of these things can be integrated. But just for your purposes, like I said, for us to drive impact, we need to make sure there are public assets that are available to access for people across the spectrum. And therefore, these are just some of the resources that we have that you could use. We have the standards, we have the guidance documents. These are all available online. There is also a self-assessment tool. So if you just want to run a quick questionnaire for yourself to see where you are on that impact journey in terms of your adherence to these standards, that's also available. And we also have an online training course which was curated with the Duke University on integrating in impact measurement and management. It's free. You only have to pay if you want a certification, but we have seen great uptake and great feedback. So please feel free to share this within your networks, and also get in touch with us in case you want access to any of these resources. And also upcoming is that we understand that there is a need for validation. So we are also coming up with an assurance system and an SDG seal that will be implemented for organizations that are going through this journey of impact. So thank you so much, Hafiz, for this opportunity, and going back to you now.
Thank you, Ms. Devahuti. I believe you briefly explained quite comprehensively about the new way how to do business, especially to embed the sustainability. I believe there will be a question from the floor. So let's go to the Prof. Azmi. The question will be that I think we can see how the Islamic social finance has been used to accelerate the COVID-19 pandemic and also being leveraged for post-pandemic economic and social recovery. So my question will be, can you share your thought on how we can maximize the utilization of Islamic social finance, and what will be the ideal approach to measure the impact?
Thank you very much. Let me just, I have my slides on. I'm not sure whether it's, can I get the slides on? Okay, let me just, which way? This is already, yeah. Anyway, but it's not moving. I just want to use a few slides. Not moving, eh?
Not moving.
Okay.
Okay.
I will be using only selected number of slides.
We can go to the next slide.
This is what I'm trying to, okay. Okay, let me just see, before I answer about how do you accelerate, the Islamic social finance, I mean, if you look at the practices of a number of countries, what I'm saying is that the usage and application of Islamic social finance is now quite prevalent in many Muslim countries, be it in Southeast Asia, South Asia, GCC countries, MENA region, West African countries. It's quite prevalent now. And if you are part of this WhatsApp group, you have World Zakat Forum group, the Wakaf Forum groups. You have so many groups now discussing about how to improve further. But in the context of Malaysia, just let me share just a few of those examples before I talk about, accelerating and maximizing. We have the My Wakaf initiative, and then we have
not working.
It's not as okay. And then we have the cash wakaf link sukuk issued by, or maybe if you can control, I say next. It's much easier.
Yep.
Can you go back, for example? Okay, after my wakaf is next one is the in Indonesia use a different approach using sukuk approach to raise fund for wakaf activities. So one is here in Malaysia, we participate through banking institution, which is also very good. And then in Indonesia, they use the capital market approach for wakaf, and of course banks, they also use banks. Next one, okay, this is an example. I will not dwell into that, but I just want to say that if you look at this particular example, what is interesting is why you use bank and why you use capital market is for the purpose of the issue of trust and transparency, because you have governance standard here. I think that's important. In context of Malaysia, under My Wakaf, when individuals give to the My Wakaf, the IBIM, the body that creates this, creates a governance standards to address the issue of trust and transparency. So similarly, in the context of Indonesia, they have this body called Badan Wakaf Indonesia, and Bank Indonesia created Wakaf Core Principles. So these Wakaf Core Principles, what do you call it, tell us in detail how do you go about implementing Wakaf, what reports that you need to make, and so on. So again, addressing the issue of trust and transparency. Next, please. Another example in Malaysia, using the mutual fund unit trust approach for Wakaf. So this is another example. Next one. It's not moving. Okay, so then the question is, how do you, okay, it's not moving. Okay, anyway, so how do you maximize the utilization of Islamic social finance? Question raised by the moderator earlier on. I think to me, one of the key things is awareness. Awareness is very important. We need to drill down on people to make them aware of the role of Islamic social finance, zakat, wakaf, sadaqah, and what is the purpose of that thing. Because at the end of the day, as I mentioned, the tools of Islamic social finance is the tool to address socio-economic development in a country. Of course, we talk about religious objectives and so on, but by and large, wakaf can be used for both Muslims and non-Muslims. So it is a very important tool to address the issue of socio-economic development. Secondly, is on the issue of blended finance. If we are able to, to blend together, and iTakat is one example where we blend. We have under iTakat, the seed capital is from zakat. Seed capital, that means that those are zakat beneficiaries. And then the microfinancing comes from the fund created by Bank Negara for micro and SMEs. And the third component is, as we know, you cannot just provide funds to micro entrepreneurs. You need to have capacity building, mentoring, coaching. So they incorporate that. So this is done by specialized institutions. So banks work with collaborating partners in order to create coaching, training for them before they can actually do business. So this is an integrated approach. So when we look at addressing poverty or financial inclusion, or addressing individuals who are, who needs to go up in the economic ladder, utilization of blended finance is one of the important approach to do, So, and we are promoting this area of blended finance. And my experience, even IDB is well known for using blended finance. I think from many of the activities, I remember the triple win example that IDB did. You can ask Abida later on about what is triple win. I will not explain in detail, but this is an example of using both social finance, zakat, wakaf, and multilateral finance to support socio-economic development, the triple win approach for vaccines, for mosquitoes and so on, mosquito nets and so on. So then the third thing is, if you want to maximize utilization, is through technology. Technology is very important. Technology is the enabler. And my earlier slides, later on slides will talk about how, for example, a particular company in US but established in Indonesia use blockchain to issue sukuk. Okay, but that one is of course for microfinance. But again, Kadu Hasan Microfinance is part of the Islamic Social Finance. So technology is very important. Fintech is also very important. We have, for example, Global Sadaqah in Malaysia. We have part of the ETIS group. We have Yala, GIFF, Wakafai, many other applications in the Muslim world now, which are using technology in order to bring about not only collection, but also efficient distribution with impact reporting. I think that's the key thing that we see. And then, of course, we talk about impact report or sustainability report. I think one of the things that I would like to address, especially since you're asking about, how to enhance further, I think impact report is one is, as being mentioned by Dr. Ramadan earlier on, it must be, of course, validated. But secondly, it's important is it must also be sector-based. We cannot have one solution for all. Each sector will have to have different measurement. So different sectors require different measurements, and what are the impact of that? And I will talk later on a bit about that. And the third thing is that we need to standardize the standards. At the moment, if you look at the earlier presentation, we have so many impact measurement, there is no standards at all. Similarly, in Islamic finance, we have even the issue of standardization of Sharia resolutions. So we need to have standards of those impact measurements or impact standards. It's an alphabet, soup of alphabets. So which one is important? My suggestion in the context of Malaysia, we need to agree, within Malaysia, what are the standards, especially if we use the blended finance, the Islamic social finance, what are the standards based on each sector, and then use it throughout the whole Islamic banking in Malaysia. And we do know that, for example, in my work with colleagues in GCC countries, the issue of sustainability in Malaysia we discussed many years ago. In GCC, only quite recently. For example, SIBAFI issued sustainability guide only this year. So, so you see the gap. So we are advanced. So I would suggest that again in Malaysia, maybe through the World Bank, IDB, come up with the standards, sector standards, and then that can be used throughout the whole, Muslim world. I think that's one of our contribution. Maybe that's a challenge to both institutions. Then we need to mainstream to do that. Okay, once we mainstream that, then we can apply to the other parts of the world. Finally, if you can go to the just skip this one. Skip next. Okay. Maybe okay. So if you look, when you talk about this impact measurement, some guidelines. I'm not going to give you specific because, as I said, it should be sector specific. Some guideline is that we need to plan. Okay, what do we want to measure? Plan that, and then we do that measurement, collect data, we assess and we review, which is what we mentioned earlier on. But once we prepare the report, validation is very important. Validation by third party is very important. And I fully agree with the earlier speaker talking about there is not enough impact specialists. So we need to have impact specialists who are good in different sectors, and they will be the one that will validate, the sustainability report done by financial institutions. Finally, last slide. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is an example, and my colleague, Dr. Bahrum is here. As I mentioned, we have the Center of Excellence in Islamic Social Finance. So what we do is that apart from research in Islamic Social Finance, we also do impact analysis. So this is an example of a project that our Center of Excellence in Social Finance is working with our friend here in one of the projects using Islamic Social Finance for urban farming. So these are some of the indicators. For example, we have micro indicators, we have economic indicators, environmental indicators, social indicators. As I mentioned, it takes into account all the plan, the assessment and so on. So, but again, I think one of the weaknesses is that we don't have a standards. So it's important to develop that standards and subsequently validate that. So if you're able to do that, and it should be sector-based, as I mentioned, then I think that's something that World Bank, IsDB, UNDP, may work together and produce a report like what you did earlier on, and give it throughout the whole Muslim world, and adopted by Islamic financial institutions globally. I think that's a challenge that I give to all three of you in front of me. Thank you very much. Okay, Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, Dr. Azmi. So I think we in exploring what kind of standard, I think they will be best for HSBC Amanah to share a little bit in terms of what their current practice, something that I think maybe can be emulated by the financial institutions or non-banking financial in integrated Islamic social finance.
Thanks, Hafiz. It's a difficult question, I must say, and one that I'll attempt to take on. So I think Ms. Chowdhury pointed out quite a pertinent point in respect of the various impact potential solutions, and I'm quite interested to see it actually, because The reality in the situation is that when we currently, as it stands, we are more focused on reporting as opposed to, what is actually the impact of the financing or, the sukuk that we have issued. So that is what people are calling or terming ESG 2.0, because at the moment now we are all just looking at reporting. And if I refer to the guidelines in the International Capital Markets Association, it actually does not put an onus on you to report the impact. It's just, you're encouraged to do so. So having actually, if I can just share some experience, having worked on, for example, the government of Malaysia's inaugural sustainability sukuk, a lot of work was put into which assets or which use of proceeds qualify. So, you have a whole framework, and then you work with your second party opinion provider, and they say, palm oil doesn't qualify, and then you say, yes, it should do, and then we say RSPO, they say, no, okay, we'll take it out. Then it goes to, like, for example, rural electrification, for example, they say, okay, you can't have a base station which takes electricity from, from a coal-fired power plant, for example, even though it's 10 megawatts or so. So there's a lot of exclusion. So what goes into the final frameworks of green bonds that you see is already a very heavily negotiated process, because that's what they allowed, or that's what they agree has the most impact. So if it's if it's an EV bus, for example, they want to know how much is the battery that they use, what is the routes that they use, so on and so forth. So at the moment now, a lot of the it's mainly focused on what is the qualifying use of proceeds. And when I think about our own framework that we set up, right? And I also, if I can just draw some stats to the SDG sukuk just before that, the SDG sukuk that we issued. So again, I'm looking at how we reported it, and it is publicly available on HSBC Group's website. So we've reported that 600 million out of the 500 million has already been allocated. So we're more than one time cover. And it's gone to 92 million has got 15% of the sukuk has been issued under SDG 3, which is good health and well-being. So these are some of the low-cost medical solutions that we have financed. And then it goes to SDG 6, 22%, or 132 million out of the 600 million has gone to SDG 6, which is clean water and sanitation. And then it goes to SDG 9 for the remaining majority of which is 63%, or 374 million, which is going to SDG 9, which is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. So we know where the money went, but we don't know what the impact of the financing is. And when I look at my own framework, which, well, not mine, but the HSBC Amanah's framework. So how we started the building blocks was value-based intermediation, maqasid, which is the prevention of harm and the attainment of benefit. So that's the guiding principle. And then we looked at the decision tree, which was produced in one of the value-based intermediation reports, which is what is your decision tree on whether a financing qualifies as being triple bottom line or not. So we applied the decision tree. So the decision tree looks, and then we applied it in our own lens, because we have a retail book, which in our case constitutes about 45% of our total financings in the retail book. So how do I take a decision tree, which is looking at a retail book? How do I look at the credit cards that I have issued, the home mortgages that I have financed, or even the personal financing that I've given? So we decided after looking, and again, data is not readily available all the time. Initially, we wanted to look at income as a segment, but we don't even know if a customer is B40 or not, because we only have that data produced once by the authorities, because it was due to COVID and they wanted us to support B40 households. The definition of B40 is household income. So how do you know whether this person's spouse is, how much does the spouse earn, for example? So you don't know that. So we work within what we can. We even went, for the B40 calculation, we actually used like Department of Statistics website, how many income generators are there per household? And then we times it by a multiplier, and then we compared it against the poverty line in each state. Because 9,000 is actually the poverty line in KL, and it's much lower, for 3,500 in Kelantan, for example. So you need to differentiate, as Prof was saying, you can't be one size fits all. Mm-hmm. So then we look at the impact of the credit card balances. So we don't, anybody who took a credit card and if we've given them a payment waiver because of the inability to pay, then we'll take that as triple bottom line. And then we look at the house financing. We look at income segment, but we look at who is buying a house for the first time. And we make sure the property is not a luxurious defined property. So again, we need to look at, what is the home price, what is deemed as luxury. And then we even qualify those from T20 or M40, but they must be buying a house for the first time, and the house must not be luxurious. So that's how we look at the retail book. And then now we look at the wholesale book, which is the majority of our financing. right? So we looked at data providers, and we looked at FTSE Russell, we looked at Vigeo Eiris, we looked at S&P, the full alphabet soup, as was mentioned, of data providers, and all of them have sort of the same approach, but some of them had different approaches. So, towards the end there, we felt that FTSE Russell was the best provider of data because number one, they work with the Bursa Malaysia, a stock exchange, and number two, they cover most of our clients anyways. So what we did is we said, okay, we'll look at the ESG score. Again, this is value-based intermediation. It's not just climate, it's environmental, social, and governance. So we look at what is the baseline score provided by FTSE Russell, if they have one, and we set a threshold. So anybody over, so they give you a score of 1 to 5, we put the minimum threshold as 2.9, and then we look at the industry. Again, it's very important looking at the industry. So if the industry is an extractive industry, such as oil and gas, mining and manufacturing, chemicals, and so on, we require a higher baseline E score, which is 2. But if the company is involved in things which are not in the extractive sector, then we allow a lower baseline of 1. So that is the baseline. If we look at any financing for any company which qualifies under that threshold, we will take every financing that we gave them as triple bottom line. But then we need to go one by one to make sure that the use of proceeds for that financing is nothing controversial or nothing which was used out of the principle of triple bottom line. And then we look at the labeled products that we have, i.e. the green loans, the social loans, the various loans. If the company does not qualify for a baseline score, that's fine. As long as we have a green loan, which is certified by an external party, it's labeled and certified, that's fine, we'll qualify that loan. And then finally, we will look at, so those companies who do not have an ESG score because they're an SME, for example, or they do not, they're not public listed, or they did not take a product loan from us, we have developed an internal questionnaire that we will ask them, and they need to score at least 80% or so in order for us to qualify. So that's some of the secret sauce that went into our triple bottom line framework, just to share with you. So we look at, these items. Now on a yearly basis, we have undertaken that we will declare what is the percentage of our assets which is in alignment with this framework. And we have an ambition that 51% of our assets will be, we are striving now to ensure that 51%, at least more than half. And why you say 51%, I assure you, to even get to 51% is hard as it stands. We are monitoring this on a monthly basis. But Islamic finance started that way as well. You start with the target, and then the Islamic financial system currently is about 35 to 40% of the conventional banking system. So it needs to start somewhere. And then we talk about the annual reporting. So on an annual basis, we have undertaken that we will verify those numbers that we will report. We will need to get a second party opinion provider to look at the impact of the financing. Who did that money go to? How many people, did we support come out of poverty alleviation? How much renewable energy did we generate, and so on? But it was interesting that Ms. Chowdhury just now was talking about also, do you actually look into the impact of the financing you gave? Which, for example, let's say I financed a renewable energy project, but that was put on like on a peat soil, or I displaced an indigenous community. So whilst the use of proceeds qualified, but actually it was impacted the large community. So things like that is very important. So I would say that in the long run, as we develop ourselves, and to Prof's point just now, I mean, the community of practitioners have actually come up with sectoral guides on various industries. There's actually been 6 so far, and they're working on another 3. And it's very detailed. It's like 90 pages per sector, which we have tried to embed into our framework as well. It's sometimes, it's quite detailed in some cases, and the 3rd cohort, I believe, is underway now. So all I can say in conclusion is that, this is a development process. It's a working process. And we feel by setting up this framework, we hope that we are putting at least one line in the sand, or, one step for humanity, or one step for Islamic banking, in respect of identifying who are the people that we finance, and also, seeing where should we be allocating our capital to as we come out on our obligations.
Okay. Actually, I have an additional question, but I think because of the time, so let Dr. Ramadan share a little bit, because you mentioned about the Islamic Social Finance adopted by Maybank. Maybe you can share a little bit what's their current practice, what kind of standard is it? Your approach, is it the best approach to be emulated by other banks in Malaysia? Please.
I try to avoid from making such a claim, but perhaps maybe I just want to start my second round with a statement that having a clear and coherent standards, metrics, and operational operationalization of the social impact measurement and management actually is one of the levers to amplify the social finance within the mainstream business plan. Because when your management start to see that from Islamic Social Finance Program, for example, under entrepreneurship, we managed to elevate the household income, for example, from 2,000 per month to 5,000 per month, then we see that this is how we actually create the pipeline for our future clients. I know that there is some capitalism, element in this, but this is our business, yeah. So actually, this actually provide us with, a conviction that Islamic social finance is not just about helping underserved and unserved segment, but having a very clear measurement in terms of the social impact, as well as clear reporting standards and so on, actually give you the impetus to amplify Islamic social finance within the space of Islamic banking. So I go to the next point, how we can scale up. Yeah, I just want to highlight 3 points. This is based on my own observation when we do Islamic social finance and when we start to infuse the social impact measurement and management into the whole equation when we do Islamic social finance. So the first one, I think I completely agree with Prof. Azmi. One of the main conundrum is to identify the standard for Islamic social finance, as well as how we measure the impact. Yeah, not just because we don't have a single gold standard when it comes to the the standard that we should be adopting, but also even there are calls from even Islamic finance fraternity. What are the contribution from Islamic finance or even from the Islamic law to enrich the current standards? So we have SDG goal, for example, as a baseline. But if we compare with the maqasidu sharia, for example, the objectives of the sharia, the higher purpose of the sharia, whether we can also infuse new indicators above and on top of SDGs, for example. So this is another interesting discussion. For example, they talk about how we strengthen the family institution. And family institution is not a clear-cut goal within SDG, for example. How we can increase the level of morality and ethics among the public, for example. So this is perhaps maybe the new input from Maqasidu Sharia that can enrich the SDG goals, which are already good in terms of setting the very broad parameter for SDG, for example. So getting the standards to be harmonized is key. At the same time, even there are calls from the Sharia scholars, even Islamic finance fraternity, to see what are the input that Islamic finance and even the Sharia expert can contribute towards the, have a more holistic standards and metrics for impact measurement. So that is the first one. Second one is breaking the silos. So I did mention in the first round that we are not, Islamic banks is not really good in terms of, having the full capabilities and a complete awareness about impact measurement. We have to work, we have to collaborate, yeah. And I think even currently silos is there, yeah. Whether we want to admit it or we try to brush it off, I think the silos is there. How Islamic Bank, how the implementing partners, we call it implementing partners among the NGOs, the likes of UNDP, for example, the like of IsDB, for example, how we can collaborate to amplify the impact that we can create out of Islamic social finance. Because each and every financial institution of entities have its own expertise and its own strength. So how we synergize between these strengths. And I think currently, if we're looking at the existing program, even if we mention about IT card and so on, I think it's very much leveraged on the individual institution strength rather than a collaborative strength or perhaps the synergy among the key industry players. So that is point number two. And perhaps point number 3, ladies and gentlemen, when we have impact measurement and we have a very clear and very systematic ways in measuring the impact, then the next thing, what we want to do about that. And I think we should also embrace and adopt what we call agile method. So we know the feedback from the clients or stakeholders. When we say stakeholders here, even the beneficiaries, yeah, the underserved segment, the B40 communities, we learn and we listen from them and how we have to be agile in terms of coming out with the plan. We don't have to come out with a product that is good for even 5 years. And we learn from the past pandemic. I mean, 2 years is a very long term. And I think, our distinguished speaker just now mentioned that after the pandemic, the level or the numbers of the poor segment has increased to 75 million. This is a big number. So we cannot just be fixed because we have 5-year plan and we plan this 2020, we have to stick with this plan. And this type of product, we have to be agile. Yeah, we have to innovate. And the good base for innovation, the good base about addressing the needs by having a clear and coherent way of doing the impact measurement. So I think if we look at the first one in terms of the harmonization of standards and even to infuse Maqasidus Sharia perspective into the standards, and then breaking the silos, encourage collaboration. And the third one is about agility in coming out with innovative solutions to address the prevalent needs. I think these are the 3 areas or 3 means that we can elevate the impact of Islamic social finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ramadan. I think to be fair, let's we take 2 or 3 questions from the floor. Oh, Mr. Abida. Mike, please, Mr. Abida. Mr. Abida. Stella, yeah.
Thank you very much. It was a great discussion. Yeah, before I ask my question or my comment, I would like to just react to Professor Azmi regarding the triple win. No, I will come to the second proposal. Yeah, the example of triple win used by IDB in providing financing, for example, in the case of eradicating polio in Pakistan, the ISDB partnered with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to provide financing to the government of Pakistan. And why we call it triple win? Because Gates Foundation gave a grant to pay or to cover the cost of financing, and ISDB provided the financing as per its usual terms, the normal terms, not on concessional, and the government of Pakistan got the financing with premium-free financing. So it's a win-win-win situation for the government, for the IDB, and for the Gates Foundation, who leverages on the amount of grants with the bigger amount of financing. This kind of tripartite collaboration was a model for creating even a fund called the LLF, Life and Livelihood Fund, which now between IDB and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and with the contribution of many governments now and many funds in GCC, which now is the basic or the main tool for blended financing and providing concessional financing by ISDB. This is just to clarify the model, but the blended finance is a trend and it's a model that we should seek, because many countries cannot afford to get high cost financing and increase their debt. So, and also the philanthropists or the foundations that are providing grants should look for other types of financing to pool this financing to reach maximum impact. Regarding your kind proposal, Professor, to work together, but also not only World Bank, IsDB, UNDP, but I think many partners could join hands to develop these standards. And we will be happy at least to initiate this proposal here in Malaysia with your center based on your research on some initial work on the main components of these standards. But I would like to emphasize what Dr. Ramazan mentioned, that while we want always to systemize and to standardize, and this helps to benchmark and to ensure harmonization and objectivity, etc. But we should not neglect the agility and the adaptation, and taking into consideration other ways of measuring the impact. For example, now there are some startups who give credit to people based on their records on social media. I mean, these new ways of measuring the impact, we need to take them into consideration and not always try to standardize and formalize in a way, in more scientific way. But we should find the compromise between measuring the impact in the new methods using, for example, the social media, at the same time trying to have formal approaches and framework for measurement. Thank you.
Oh, another question. I think maybe we can take one or two, then we also need to answer the question in the Slido.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you, Brother Hafiz. I just would like to reiterate what Dr. Ramadan have said, and I think Brother Abida have also echoed that while we are concerned about quantified measurement, the tangible returns, the tangible impact, I think we should also be placing some importance on the intangible impact. Like Dr. Ramadan have said, the strengthening of family institution, the community empowerment, and others. So I believe when we talk about the impact, when we manage and we measure and we report the impact of Islamic social finance, it should place equal weightage on both tangible and intangible returns and impact. And remember, some of the intangible impact are actually much more powerful than the tangible impact. So I would like to consider for those, since we do not have a standard yet, but when we create the standard, we would place some weightage on the intangible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barum. I think one more maybe the last question here, or we have two. I think the last, okay.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. Good afternoon, everyone. Malina Wong here from the Baraka and Ethical Consumer Union. There's an effort that of our team that has put together that we realize the ways forensics is so important to be inculcated into the standard too. The ways forensics, whether I had the chance to participate into a welfare development program for the city in Lumpur Pantai. We have one side is Bangsa, we have the other side which is Kampung Kerinci, that some people's waste can be another's treasure. Same as nations. There are developed nations of their waste can be another nation's treasure. So there is so much of harm that it has brought to us today on waste, whether it is in material waste, time waste, or effort waste. In Malaysia, in our very rough weather, I think it is a very good test bed for us to learn that much of waste has cost us generation to generation to pay. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the last one. Then we can address the question in the Slido.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Sohaimi. Now, as I look at the title of today's talk, social finance, I would like to sort of narrow it to social enterprise. And in a way, this covers the questions, the methods that have been raised by last speakers, social enterprise. What we have heard is so much the bigger macro, approaches, be it on measurement and so on much bigger investment, be it infra, for the poor country and so on. Now, the kind of measurement metrics are totally different if you talk about social enterprises. And if you talk about trying to create employment, to raise, reduce poverty, I think the social enterprise is the way to go, right? So now, back to measurement, I would like to know, if you apply to social enterprise, what's the cost here? What's the fee here? Because you're saying very many small enterprises, and if you do impact and measurement, that's going to incur costs, right? Now, I want to relate this example. Unfortunately, UNDP, many years ago, they went into Kenya and do blended finance and try to help the small enterprises, people in the kampongs, the villages and so on, but their fee is rather high. Now, maybe that was years ago. Maybe now they realize that shouldn't be the case. Because if you do charge a high fee from your blended finance, in a way you are really cutting down on more money that you can spend on these sort of services, right? So now my final word is this. This morning, we have heard about the launch of Islamic Digital Asset Center, or basically tokenization, or what they call RAM. I think rather than relying on just purely charitable philanthropy monies, funds, we should go and try the way of tokenization. You can do it small if you do tokenization, and then in that way, you don't need impact measurement so much, because then it's like a stock market, small base market, they monitor themselves, they will deliver the performance. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think there are questions in the Slido, maybe the social taxonomy. Is it, Rajami, you can answer that one? The social taxonomy? And then the one of the question, I think the previous one is on the zakat, maybe Dr. Ramadan can answer. And then the last one, Dr. Azmi, then you also can address that Mr. Abida comments. And then for Ms. Chowdhury, there is one specific question for you about the lack of impact professional on the ground. So we'll start with Raja Amir first.
On the social taxonomy?
Yep.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's about, before we embark on such a endeavor, the first is to lay the building blocks and the ground, in terms of what is exactly that you're trying to do. So, some of the companies that we've talked to in the past, they say, look, we want to raise a sustainable bond, we want to raise a sustainable sukuk straight away, right? And the first question we have is, do you actually have a transition pathway? Have you actually set out your long-term goals in terms of how you will decarbonize or how you will move? So first and foremost, social taxonomy to a certain extent is already built into what Islamic banks have been asked to look into, specifically under the Financial Sector Blueprint 22 to 26. And whatever you do, you always need to start from somewhere, and then you go from there. So, this framework that we've developed, and also the green frameworks that other financial institutions have developed, and I believe Maybank has also come out, with one, is a starting point. It's not the end of the game, it's only the starting point. This is a live document that can be updated at any point in time and will be updated as you go along. And you can see that this is version 1, version 2, and what are the changes. So yes, I believe that we should have a taxonomy which encompasses E, S, and G, not only E, not only S, not only G, all three components of the E, S, and G. And from there, we have a taxonomy, and that's how we measure, are we in alignment with that taxonomy, and what do we need to do to be, better?
Dr. Ramadan, the first question on the wakaf, on the zakat.
Yeah, my answer, if we look at the current practice, the impact measurement is very much on the beneficiaries level, not really on the donors or the payer of the zakah. But I think we can always expand the metrics, or perhaps the coverage of the impact measurement, even to cover whether we fulfill the mandate given by the payer of zakah, for example. And I think for zakah maybe one thing, but even for waqif or the one who actually endow their cash or their funds, even I think we have a very clear issues and needs that we have to resolve, because for zakah normally is subject to 8 beneficiaries, and it's very much up to the zakah body or zakah authorities how to distribute the zakah to the beneficiaries. But I think in terms of the waqif, because the waqif, the one who performed the endowment, actually can state his intention, and we have the obligation to report whether the obligation has been fulfilled or not. But as we speak now, the impact measurement, especially for zakah or even waqaf for that matter, is very much at the beneficiaries level, not really inclusive of the donors' intentions and donors' needs, so to speak.
Okay, Dr. Azmi, maybe.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to follow up on what Brother Abida mentioned earlier on, for those who do not know, triple wins is simply a murabaha financing where the IDB provide vaccine to government of Pakistan under the commercial terms. However, the profit portion, the profit margin, is paid by Gates Foundation. So that's what we meant by triple win. So 3 parties benefit. So obviously, because Gates coming from the philanthropy fund, obviously the markup can be lower. Okay, so that's how, you know, blended finance using commercial funds, philanthropic funds to benefit a particular country. So that's one example. But to continue further on what question earlier on about social enterprise, and the analogy I would say similar to the small fintech firm. You know, fintech firms have problems in terms of Sharia governance, Sharia compliance, Sharia audits, and so on. So one of the important key things we need to do is that once we standardize, the cost is very cheap. Just like when we talk about issuing sukuk, I think one of the challenges of issuing sukuk in many countries is that the cost of issuing sukuk is quite expensive, legal costs, and so on, because there is no standardized documentation. At least in Malaysia, we have, but in some other countries, there is no standardized documentation. So similarly, if we are able to develop standards for impact measurement, then it can be applied to social enterprises, to fintech firms, and to many other organizations. Of course, banks have the resources to pay, but for SMEs, micro, social enterprises would have a challenge, you know, to pay for those services. Thank you.
Ms. Chowdhury, one question for you. What is the entry point and how to start? Because lack of impact professional on the ground. Maybe you can answer that. I think then it will be our last question, because we have a lot of questions that we need to address.
Right, sure. And I'll be very quick, Mr. Hafiz. So, and that's a great question. I think the starting point really is to understand that impact measurement and management is really like a science. It needs to be based on some very empirical principles of how you apply this science, how you measure and manage this science. And I think that's really the recognition that is missing. And like a lot of these panelists, and I was very heartened to hear some of these very insightful discussions, that, you know, while there is one complete layer of generalist impact sort of professionals, you also need sector specific impact measurement and management sort of practices. There is also another level of advisory that is offered to funds and different kind of financial structures. For instance, I can clearly glean from the conversation today that for Islamic finance, there needs to be a very concerted effort on how for this particular kind of structuring of finance and the origin of this finance, how you need a completely different lens and a more specific lens to design these kind of frameworks. And then, of course, a lot of our panelists also spoke about how beneficiary level impact analysis is one of the more prominent ones. So clearly you can see that even within the entire profession of impact measurement and management, there are different layers and complexities that one needs to navigate. So it's not easy. Especially given the fact that it continues to remain a gray area, and it's really not one of the things that has been built into the curriculum of schools or colleges or universities. So that's one of the things that actually our team is concertedly working on. So I did share with you this one particular course that we have developed with the University of Duke, but we continue to also engage with other universities to see how we can embed this in the curriculum. So the short answer really is that there is a lack of university programs that offer this. But as a starting point, you can access some of these free courses that are available from UNDP.
Okay.
And we'll also keep you updated on any such work that we continue to do with universities. Yeah.
Okay, one last key message from you, 30 seconds. One last message.
From me?
Yep.
All
for,
right.
for this session, yep.
I thought you
Before
would
we
have
end.
had enough of me already, but all right. So a very quick message really is, and I tell this to everyone, that, impact cannot be built in a day. It takes baby steps. And I think it's recognizing that it's a process and it needs to be built into your organizational ethos. And I really commend some of our panelists, especially this Cocoon project. I would really like to look at it up close. That, how we can make it as part of a change management system, and then sort of dream about these big impact aspirations and what SDGs we want to track and report on. So really looking at it as a baby step, short and process that can help you build your impact aspirations.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Divahuti. Dr. Azmi, maybe last 30 seconds. Each speaker.
Standards is very important. We need to develop those standards to be agreed upon. But using technology is very important because it helps to reduce costs. So I think different technology are available now. I think it's a matter of working with the right parties to develop those standards using the technologies.
In line with impact reporting, and I'm very motivated to hear about this triple win project, which I also have, I read about it before in terms of the immunization of, for example, polio in Africa. We've seen recently World Bank actually issued what they call the Rhino Bond, where again they group together, the outcome funders who want to pay for an outcome achieved, and they also managed to, it's a AAA institution, issued the note. I think this is right up our alley. We would like to see Islamic finance, move in this direction from the immunization sukuk and also the sukuk ihsan, which was issued by Khazanah in 2015 and 2018. I think there's a lot of avenue for us to, in terms of the impact, the use of proceeds, which could be for, indigenous community uplifting, refugee upskilling. In Malaysia, we have the issue with our harimau and all that is going to extinction. So many use of proceeds which can be used, and I think Islamic finance should embrace it.
Dr. Ramadan?
Yeah, for the case of impact measurement within Islamic social finance, I think in a nutshell is seeing is believing. Because when we see the impact, I think people will believe that this is the way forward. Islamic social finance is not a CSR. Islamic social finance is part of the mainstream Islamic banking business. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ramadan. I think from the World Bank, we will continue our collaboration with the VBI, like we also support for the sectoral guidance for VBIF, so we will continue our support to the VBI community. I think with that, before we end our session, let's give our speaker a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you. Back to you, Shahira.
Thank you to Mr. Hafiz and our esteemed panelists for your frank and astute observations. If I may invite you back to your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our session for today. Again, we would appreciate it if you could please submit your feedback via the Slido QR code on the screen, #ISFMY 2022, before the end of the event. And we hope that this discussion has been fruitful for all participants. To reiterate from today's panel, impact management and measurement will be a vital addition to the Islamic finance landscape, providing contributors, organizations, beneficiaries, and the public with a robust framework of best practice for reporting, investing, and decision-making processes. We hope to see the incorporation of impact management and measurement within the framework for Islamic social finance that will enable organizations or authorities to be more transparent about the risks and opportunities they face as we move forward towards achieving sustainable development. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank everyone for joining us for today's session, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you and Assalamualaikum.